Malcolm Reed, who's not here today, I'm sorry I don't see him, he gave a suggestion to Anna about a column that was run in the New York Times a little more than a year ago, op-ed tips. And I sent that around to everyone. Did everyone get that? Good. Many of these tips will sound familiar to you because we have talked about them in class. Get the big pieces out early. Make your point quickly. Offer an opinion, an argument. Be authoritative. Don't be wishy-washy. Remember, perhaps be damned. You have an opinion, stick to it directly. Authority matters. It matters in everything you write. Then number 5, I called a little attention to younger writers with no particular expertise or name recognition. It is unfortunately true that the public press will let people who have name recognition write things that they won't let people who don't have name recognition write. And occasionally some of those things aren't very good. But because the person is famous or well-known, they get their piece printed. Is that intellectually fair? No, not particularly, but it does happen. But let's say you're trying to break into print. Let's say you're writing an op-ed for the Huffington Post, or you're writing an op-ed for the Boston Globe. You're not known, you're not a known person. The advice here is 80% new information, 20% opinion. In other words, you've got to show something in your cards that's new to the readership. You have to present yourself as someone who's a fresh voice, offering something that is a new angle of vision with new information. Avoid the passive voice. Write declarative sentences. Don't use weasel words such as apparently, or indeed, or perhaps, or seems, unless they are entirely warranted. Be proleptic. That is, get the better of the major objection to your argument by raising and answering it. A rebuttal, a counter-argument. You need to do that in an op-ed. Otherwise, the newspaper or whatever organ it is going to be flooded with letters. And they're going to say, so-and-so didn't, or here's the counter-argument. Sweat the small stuff, we've talked about that. Every minor thing that you can improve, collectively taken together, will raise your composition an entire new level. That is how it's done. It's not done with one sweep of a wand. It's done with sands make the mountain. You're not Proust. You know who Proust is? Proust was a French writer. He wrote a very elegant French prose in which some of the sentences would go on for half a page. You're not Proust. Keep sentences short and paragraphs tight. Kill the cliches, number 12. Kill the cliches. I love the example he gives. If you want to give the reader an outside-the-box perspective on how to solve a problem from hell by reimagining the policy toolbox to include stakeholder voices, well, stop right there. You've all heard this kind of boilerplate phrasing. It's pretty mindless. Editors notice these sorts of expressions. Now, here's an interesting thing. We come across what we call a trope in these tips, an actual trope. Editors notice these sorts of expressions. I would actually correct his statement here. I'd say editors notice these expressions the way French chefs notice slices of Velveeta cheese. You like that image? What's Velveeta cheese? No, it's not cheese. It's processed cheese product. That's right. It's not real cheese. So it's like that old ad, where's the beef? It's not real beef. Where's the cheese? Repulsive in themselves and indicative of the mental slop that lies beneath. He's being tough. But suspect these things. If you find writing easy, you're doing it wrong. It's absolutely true. The art of writing lay in thrift. And then finally, this advice, which I think is mostly true, I have to say. The editor is always right. The editor isn't always right, but it's pretty useless to argue with an editor, an experienced editor. It doesn't make much sense. Unless the editor completely misunderstands you, then you're going to have to clarify what you've written in order to make it understandable. Treat your editor with respect by not second-guessing her judgment or belaboring her with requests. I'd wish you luck, but good writing depends on conscious choices, not luck. Is this better or is this better? Is this better or is this better? And those conscious choices have to be yours in the end. So that's good advice. You might want to hold on to it. It's something that will hold you in good stead in almost every kind of writing you do. Today I'd like to talk about two major things and one thing that's important, but I won't spend much time on it. The two major things are tropes, first of all. We talked about schemes last time, and you remember the difference between schemes and tropes? Schemes are arrangements of words, sometimes somewhat unusual or artful arrangements of words that violate what would be considered normal prosaic word order. And tropes are some kind of figurative language or language that is not strictly literal or that suggests something that is not strictly a literal meaning. So I've listed tropes here on the handout. They are listed very conveniently for you, as Corbett does. It's really good. It's much better than the table of contents right here, with page number keyed to each term. You don't even have to go to the index. You don't have to go to the table of contents. It's printed right on the flyleaf of the book, on the end papers rather. It's printed right there. So you just look at these terms. You can look them up. I suggest reading in Corbett to study Corbett. I don't want to stand here and repeat what Corbett says. It's direct. He gives examples. It's pretty clear. If you have questions, please let me or Samuel know. Tropes are important. We just came across one in Tips for How to Write an Op-Ed. Kill the cliches because they will be recognized as quickly as a French chef recognizes slices of Velveeta cheese. You probably won't forget that image. I'm not sure it's the best, but it's a pretty good one because a French chef would not be happy with slices of Velveeta cheese. Out. How many of you regularly use tropes in your writing? That's pretty much so my impression in writing I've read in the college for the last 40 years. People are hesitant to venture the use of imagery in academic or even in any other writing. They're unsure about it. You have been taught in many cases to write a straightforward, expository, argumentative, utilitarian prose. And many of you obviously can do that. That's great. But that is not the best kind of prose. The best kind of prose has the added stylistic element of schemes and tropes, according to your own personal invention and use. It livens things up. It makes it more memorable. It activates the mind of the reader, because the mind of the reader is no longer simply accepting a declarative statement. The mind of the reader is forced to make an active comparison between two things, or an active comparison between something that's metaphoric and something that's literal. And very often that active comparison involves comparing something that is a sensory image, such as, say, Velveeta cheese. You can taste it, you can touch it. You can't really smell it because it doesn't have much of a smell. It's not real cheese. But it's an image, and you can see it. Now, what do you think is more memorable? A whole line of abstract words, or abstract words mixed occasionally with imagery that calls to mind things that your senses are familiar with? You can see it. You have that memory. Or you can even smell it. There is, for example, in Proust's writing, to bring him up again, a famous image of something that calls back to him memories of childhood. It is the presence of a madeleine. What's a madeleine? It's something you eat. Do you know what a madeleine is? Katie?
It's like a small, spongy pastry.
Yeah, it's a small, spongy pastry, maybe not quite the right word. Yes, it's kind of French version almost of kind of cornbread in a way. But when Proust says, I smell this, he says, and what happens? Carried right back to his childhood. Why? Interestingly enough, well, why do people wear aftershave or perfume? It goes straight to the limbic system of the brain. That's where scent goes. The limbic system is one of the most primitive parts of the brain, and it excites lots of other parts. That's why sometimes when you smell something, it immediately reminds you of the same place and time of that odor. There are certain detergents which, when I smell them, I'm immediately transported back to my junior high school in Glens Falls, New York. Not the happiest of memories, but I can't help it. It's embedded in my limbic system. Anyone ever had that kind of experience? You have an image, you have a smell, and the association of ideas that you have immediately calls something else to mind. Well, using a trope or an image or a metaphor or a simile in your writing will, for your reader or your auditor, make an active leap between something that is sensory and something that may be more abstract or intellectual. And the combination of those two things is liable to stay far longer in that person's mind than just the continued use of purely utilitarian and purely abstract language. So, as you write your op-ed for next Tuesday, I ask you, try to use some tropes and schemes. And if they don't quite work, that's all right. Try to use them. You'll have a couple editors who will tell you whether they think it works or not, but make a conscious effort. A writer who develops a use of tropes and schemes over a period of time develops more of an individual voice, and a writer with an individual voice is more distinctive and often more persuasive than a writer who doesn't have a distinctive individual voice. Could you turn, just for a minute, if you have in our own words, to 364-65 again. This is Elie Wiesel's speech that we looked at a little at the end of the hour last time. We'll start at the top, and as I read, when I come across a scheme, or I've read part of a scheme, just shout it out. Fair enough? You recognize it? You can pull out your outline, you can pull out Corbett, you can use whatever aids are important for you. Top of 365, beginning with the first new sentence. I have learned the danger of indifference, the crime of indifference. Yes, and perhaps the danger of indifference, the crime of indifference. Not so much alliteration, though you could say it is, yeah. Not quite. Yeah, epistrophe. Shout it out. Yes, epistrophe. I know, to an untutored audience it might sound like something vulgar, but it's not. Epistrophe, yes. For the opposite of love, I have learned, is not hate but indifference. Jews were killed by the enemy, but betrayed by their so-called allies. Possibly. I have a question mark about that. Maybe parallelism, maybe antithesis. Allies who found political reasons to justify their indifference or passivity. Certainly the repetition of indifference becomes a form here of anaphora too. But I have also learned that suffering confers no privileges. So I have learned is now being repeated with some variation. It all depends what one does with it, and this is why survivors of whom you spoke, Mr. President, have tried to teach their counterparts how to build on ruins, how to invent hope in a world that offers none, how to proclaim faith to a generation that has seen it shamed and mutilated. Yeah, anaphora, I would say, and perhaps parallelism of some kind as well. And also, although it's not in your list of schemes, there's a certain climax here. There's a certain triadic or even greater sense of climax. How to build, how to invent, how to proclaim. And I believe, we believe, that memory is the answer, perhaps the only answer. Parallelism to some degree, and epistrophe, yes, yes. Now, one of the reasons he wants to stress memory is because the idea that the Holocaust will never be forgotten. That the worst thing to do with it as a fact of history is to forget it. You can't change what happened. You can forget it. And forgetting it would be the worst thing to do. A little farther down, Mr. President, I was there, period. I was there when, this is a, anadiplosis. Anadiplosis. Now, I'm not going to quiz you on these terms on the final exam, but I want you to be able to mark them and say what it is. This is the use of a word or phrase at the end of a clause or sentence and then at the beginning of the next one. Go through the rest of this address. You haven't done that in section yet, have you, Samuel? Go through the rest of this address. It is one of the best addresses I have ever seen for teaching schemes because of the conscious, because of the conscious use that Elie Wiesel makes of them. The whole address is essentially structured around the use of schemes. It's a very formal address. He gave it in a very sober and humble way, speaking to the President of the United States. But the repetition and the use of these schemes gave a great deal of gravity and weight to what he was saying. As we mentioned last time, Reagan went to the Bitburg Cemetery anyway. But what Wiesel was trying to do is invoke a kind of admonitory or prophetic power, as we spoke about it. You've all now, I'm sure, heard the phrase in the last few years, if you hadn't heard it before, speak truth to power. This was a phrase that I think for maybe 10 years was not very commonly heard. And it has been reinvoked because of political argument and debate. Speaking truth to power is a hard thing to do. Why?
It's a risk.
It is a risk. It is a risk. Why does the federal government have special provisions for whistleblowers? Because whistleblowers are often leaned upon, or they lose their jobs, or they're demoted, or they're transferred. So speaking truth to power is something which you may very well in your life feel that you want to do. And when you do it, you will not be human if you are not at least a little scared. People who are genuinely powerful do not like to be criticized. I was listening this morning to the BBC World Service report about, I believe it was in Myanmar, and there are now in other countries similar crimes, where that if you put something up on the internet that is not strictly true, you can be arrested for the crime of fake news. Well, this is a very convenient statute for governments to have. We are undergoing a case currently in the courts in the United States in which a reporter is being denied press credentials at the White House. This case is now in the federal courts, as I understand it. There's a suit. And the whole question is whether this individual can be disbarred from having these credentials. Speaking truth to power is a risky thing. Sometimes the power that is can react to it. Sometimes it can react to it legally and do things to the person who said something. We like to think that if what was said was true, no harm can come to that person. But that is not the case. Russell Crowe was in a movie some years ago about a man in the tobacco industry who told to various authorities what was actually going on in the tobacco industry. You weren't old enough to remember the time when 7 tobacco executives got up in front of Congress and all raised their right hands, and they all swore to things that were patently proven false later about what they knew about the habit-forming nature of nicotine and how they treated nicotine in their cigarettes and what they knew about the health effects of cigarettes.